Welcome to part 2 of the PoE 2 reveal breakdown. This time, I'm going to be going over endgame activities, including the Atlas, League mechanics, and the Atlas passive tree. Because of course, this is Path of Exile. Everything happens to have a tree. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Jonathan himself has personally made sure that every tree in Path of Exile, that's right, when you're walking by in your map, every single tree that you see has its own tree. Because how else are you going to customize the experience of walking past them? So let's get into things, starting with a quick overview of how the endgame works, at least for the early access, and then getting into what the endgame entails. I'm not going to take too much time on this, feel free to pause if you want to spend longer, but the quick TLDR is, normally the game's going to have acts 1 through 6 for the campaign, then around level 65 to get into endgame. For the early access, it has acts 1 through 3, with acts 4 to 6 being unavailable. So, to fill the gap and allow for proper character progression, you go through acts 1 to 3 again in a difficulty that's called Cruel. Call back to the fact that the original Path of Exile launched with 3 difficulties, Normal, Cruel, and Merciless. So once you reach the endgame, you explore the Atlas of Worlds. You enter each zone by spending a waystone. Think of this as a single-use key. This also means, as you kill monsters within the zone, you're going to need to get more waystones to drop. And you do this by crafting your waystones to add more modifiers. Now, unlike a game such as Diablo 4, where modifiers tend to be a negative, there's both good and bad modifiers here. Your prefixes modify the rewards. Prefixes are good, and you definitely want more loot. Whereas the suffixes increase the danger. And in addition to increasing the danger, they also increase your chances of getting more waystones as you kill the monsters within the map. If you're thinking, okay, but what if I don't drop any waystones and I run out? Don't worry, there's going to be some sort of failsafe system. In PoE 1, that failsafe is you can go back in the campaign and drop some waystones there, then continue on with the mapping, or if you want, trade with some other players and buy their waystones to then continue your progress. When you enter zone, your task is going to be simple. Kill all of the rare and unique enemies within the zone to move on. Which is pretty handy, because those rare and unique enemies are also going to be higher level than the rest of the monsters in the zone, meaning they are your best bet if you want to buy a higher tier of waystone. At first, when you enter the Atlas of Worlds, you're going to start with waystone tier 1, which will probably be around level 65 monsters. For example, in the original Path of Exile, those monsters are level 68. But as you clear the zones, and as you get more waystones to drop from higher level monsters, you should go up in the tiers. For example, in Path of Exile, there are 16 tiers of maps, well, technically 17, but let's just stick with 16. Divided up into white, yellow, and red, with white being tiers 1 to 5, yellow being 6 to 10, and red being 11 plus. It is very likely that Path of Exile 2 is going to have the same system for waystones. And speaking of rewards, about 1/4 of the tiles available on the Atlas have a map boss. Luckily, these are denoted by a nice little handy icon, so you'll know which ones to enter, or depending on your build, which ones to avoid. Obviously, if your build's all the way focused into clear speed, you might not want to run too many bosses unless you have to. On the other hand, maybe you have a lot of single target damage, or maybe you have a friend who specializes in single target damage. Then that means bosses are going to be something you want to target, because GGG has said, since they are rarer, they're also going to be particularly rewarding. And if you've played Path of Exile 1 even a little bit, all of this is sounding very familiar. It's the mapping system. That's true. But there is one very big difference between the mapping experience in Path of Exile 1 and the mapping experience in Path of Exile 2. In PoE 1, you have 6 portals, effectively meaning you have to die 6 times before you reach a fail state. And yes, I know, dying once and losing your EXP feels like a fail state, but you technically didn't fail the map until you died 6 times. In PoE 2, this is not the case. If you die once, that area becomes inaccessible to you. You fail the area, and you need to go around. Now, one concern I'm already seeing is, what if I fail too many maps in a row? What if I fail all the maps that I can travel to? Is my Atlas just bricked? Does my account get deleted? Well, on the one hand, it'd be pretty funny to see someone's account get deleted on stream because they bricked their Atlas. On the other hand, that would be terrible. So no, GGG is going to have some sort of failsafe system in there. I don't know, maybe it means if you fail every possible route, an area of the Atlas just mysteriously reappears, and you know what? There's a clear path. Or maybe it means that you can rerun a failed area. You won't get the loot, but you'll be able to progress, kind of like last Epoch handles. I don't know what form it's going to take, but I feel confident in saying you won't be able to completely brick your atlas. Either way, let's look on the positive and assume you're not going to fail too many of your maps. You will want to look around for the various endgame activities and special events present on your atlas. These are all those different icons. Right now they probably don't mean much to you unless you played PoE 1. That's fine. As you go through and experience different content types, you'll soon learn them by heart. You'll know which ones work well for your build and which ones you'd rather avoid. But among all the different icons and options on the map, there's one of particular importance: Precursor Towers. When you explore one of these, it reveals a large portion of a map in radius, allowing you to then progress deeper into the atlas. This is where you can use tablets to add even more rewards to all the maps in radius. Think of it as a way to add other endgame activities into your map. For example, another of the endgame activities, which can show up on your atlas, is Breaches, essentially where you fight a bunch of demons and get some epic loot. You can use tablets to add these to all of your maps in the radius of a tower. To do this, you would use a breach tablet on the Precursor Tower. Now, all the adjacent maps have breaches on them. And yes, like many other things in Path of Exile, these tablets are craftable, meaning you have even more control over the way the mechanic is modified. If you're struggling, you might look for tablets that add monsters to your breach, making it easier to keep it active. Or, if you're doing really well, you might want something that really amps up those rewards, maybe at the cost of some of the monsters, making it harder to keep the breach active for longer. In this way, tablets are a self-reinforcing mechanic, because if you use breach tablets to get more breaches, then you run the breaches, you will drop more breach tablets, allowing you to run more breaches in your future maps. There are also areas where multiple Precursor towers overlap, allowing you to really juice things and look for synergies between the different endgame activities. So instead of just running Breach, you might run Breach along with another endgame mechanic like Ritual. Last up, as you're exploring, you might find a gigantic Precursor fortress, surrounded by an ancient maze. To enter this, you need 3 keys, which are found by killing the leaders of local factions. Each of these fights are the Uber version of an act boss. So, to get the key, you need to kill the faction leader. To kill the faction leader, you need to kill their 2 lieutenants. These are always found in the zones adjacent to the leader. But if you die during this process, the leader will escape and you need to track them down again. So that begs the question, what's in the fortress? And I have absolutely no idea. This is the pinnacle encounter for Path of Exile 2. And it's going to have multiple difficulty tiers. It's also probably going to be very challenging, and aside of that, all I can do is speculate based on some of the pinnacle encounters in PoE and what little I know about PoE 1's lore. For example, in PoE 1, Adziri, the Shaper, and the Maven were all examples of pinnacle encounters. And we also don't know that much about precursors in PoE 1 lore. I think the league that focused on them the most was Delve, where you finally get to dig deep enough into Rayclast to find the remnants of ancient Vaal cities, the Abyssal Denizens, and the Primordials led by the Crystal King. So I could very much see the Precursor being from either the Abyssal or Primordial factions, or maybe it's going to be some massive cosmic horror that found its way into the Atlas and was then contained within the fortress. After all, we don't really know if a Precursor fortress is there to keep things in or to keep things out. Now, if you've played PoE 1 before, me saying things like Breach and Ritual probably already sounds pretty familiar. But if you haven't, Breach and Ritual were what are called League mechanics, temporary content that eventually became a permanent part of Path of Exile. And Path of Exile 2 also has many of these activities, but now they're not really temporary content that became permanent, they are simply part of the endgame, different things that you can do. So now I'm going to go over some of the endgame activities available in Path of Exile 2 for the early access. First up, lesser endgame activities. These are things that automatically appear along your mapping journey and aren't going to be tied to their own progression systems. The first is Precursor artifacts. These shrines buff all the monsters in radius and are guarded by different packs of enemies attracted to the power. Defeat the monsters and you can claim the artifact for yourself, getting a temporary buff that should help you clear the map faster. I don't know what all of these buffs are going to do, but what I can say is it's going to be way better than a Diablo 4 conduit shrine. Then next up there's Strongbox, which is a trap, but also there's a lot of loot, so you might as well go ahead and trigger it. When you click the strongbox, the area closes off, isolating you from the rest of your map, and then you have to defeat the waves of monsters that spawn. At the very least, you have to defeat them if you want to get the loot. You could always give up and die, but I really don't recommend it. One special note about strongboxes is they're craftable, so use some of your currencies to increase the rewards. Just beware this will also increase the danger. And last up, you might come across powerful enemies frozen in essences. Defeat them to get a special crafting material. Basic essences add an affix to an item. So there's Essence of Haste, takes your white boots, and transforms them into magic boots with 35% movement speed. You can then add a second affix to fill out the suffix. Then you have a magic item with 2 affixes, at which point you'll need a greater essence. This adds an affix, but also upgrades the item from magic to rare, similar to the effects of a regal orb. Normally, when you're crafting, you're adding and removing random affixes, but essences are deterministic. This makes them incredibly powerful, and you can use essences to make 3 affix items that would otherwise be very rare or difficult to create. Next up, you have the endgame activities with their own progression systems, the first of which I've already mentioned, and that is Breach. Think of breaches as tears in reality, through which many demons crawl. So if you interact with a breach hand, demons start spilling into reality, and you get to kill them. The faster you kill the demons, the longer the breach is going to keep going, though eventually you're probably going to run out of enemies, resulting in the breach getting closed. Now, in addition to having its own progression system, each of these endgame activities also have unique rewards and a pinnacle boss. For Breach, the unique rewards are catalysts and breach rings. Catalysts increase the quality of your jewelry, so amulets, rings, and belts. This enhances one of the affixes present on the item. One catalyst might increase the value of life modifiers, making them up to 20% more powerful. But breach rings can have up to 50% quality, meaning you can have a significantly stronger version of an affix, which you wouldn't find on a regular item. Then, if you do a lot of breaches, eventually you're going to start finding breach splinters. Combine these into a breach stone and use it to challenge Zesht in the Twisted Domain. This is one of the game's pinnacle encounters. In this case, the one that is specifically tied to breach. Not only is this how you progress the Atlas passives, a meta progression system that I'll get into later in the video, but also there's a very good chance that each of the pinnacle encounters have some of their own unique rewards. Just don't expect this to be easy. You'll need pretty good clear speed to be able to go through the Twisted Domain, and then you're going to need some really good single target, strong defenses, and the ability to avoid attacks if you're going to take on the ultimate Breach Lord Zesht. Now the next endgame activity is Ritual, where you kill monsters to sacrifice them to the King in the Mist and gain tribute, which you then exchange for rewards. Monsters killed within the ritual circle resurrect when you activate it, only of course to be killed again. After you kill them a second time, they will appear in subsequent rituals as well. You get this kind of stacking effect, each one becoming harder and each one becoming more rewarding. And your rituals can even resurrect monsters from other endgame activities that are present in your map. So if there's a breach near your ritual, there's a good chance that those breach monsters are going to be coming back and dying a few times, giving you tribute as they do. They may even be able to drop some of their unique loot, though that hasn't been confirmed. That's just speculation based on how it works in PoE 1. If you complete enough rituals, you can expect items, currencies, and sometimes omens. These are the mechanic that's unique to ritual, and they give you meta crafting effects. In other words, a crafting effect that modifies how you craft. So for example, an omen of dextral annulment allows you to specifically remove suffixes from an item, whereas an omen of sinistral annulment would allow you to specifically remove prefixes. This cuts down on the randomness of crafting and allows you to make better items. The pinnacle boss for this is the King in the Mists. Now GGG hasn't said anything about how he works in PoE 2, but hey, if you want to know a little bit about how he might work, check out the PoE 1 version of the fight. I'm sure he's going to have some new mechanics, but I'm pretty sure some of the basics are going to remain, like his maze mechanic, which you're definitely going to want to learn before taking the boss on. On the other hand, if you're doing the delirium endgame activity, you might be hearing some voices in your head. Nope, that's not just you, it's Tang Mazu. He's sending whispers in hopes that he'll drive you mad. During delirium, a grey fog covers your entire map. The deeper you go, the more monsters that spawn, thus of course, the more you can kill them for rewards, but also the deeper you go, the stronger the monsters get, and rare and unique enemies start getting corrupted and using special demonic abilities. But if you're able to withstand the madness of delirium, you might get some distilled emotions. Use these to instill your amulet and add notable passive effects. Not only is this quite a bit of power, because some of the notables are absolutely crazy in PoE 2, but you could use it to access something that normally wouldn't be available to your class, at least without a significant investment in traveling, say, halfway across the tree. If you're playing a mercenary, you're going to start at the bottom of a tree. But what if you want a node from the witch area? Well, that would be a lot of travel. Or you could just instill it on your amulet and get the effects without having to spend any passive nodes. Now you can also instill watchstones. This adds layers of delirium, making them more dangerous and also increasing the rewards. Think of it as another way to combine endgame mechanics to really juice up your maps and get the most rewards possible. Now the pinnacle content here isn't a boss. Doesn't mean you won't fight bosses as part of it. The pinnacle content is Simulacrum, where you confront Tengbazu himself, and he summons waves of enemies drawn straight from your nightmares. If you make it through enough waves, you might even fight a boss like Omniphobia Fear Manifest. At that point, you don't have many options except face your fears, or die trying. But hey, not everything has to be about horrors and darkness. And everyone needs a hobby. So for some exiles, their hobby might be going on expeditions. You can think of this as archaeology. Really, really extreme archaeology, done with dynamite, as one does. You'll place explosives and use them to dig up remnants of the past, specifically tied with the Kalguran faction. Unfortunately, dynamite to the head is a really unpleasant way to wake up, so you're going to have to deal with some very angry, very undead Kalgurans. You're also going to want to be careful with how you place your explosives, not simply thinking about how many things you get in radius, but also thinking about the remnants you interact with. Remnants affect all the monsters in the explosive chain, giving them buffs and also increasing their rewards. Just be very careful, as some remnant modifiers can render monsters immune to a damage type, and it could completely brick your build. And remember, it's not just going to be those caught in this blast, it's also going to be all the subsequent ones. Meaning you could lock yourself out of a lot of juicy rewards if you don't pay attention. Now the pinnacle content for Expedition comes in the form of Expedition logbooks. Basically, giant maps and tons of explosives where you can create even bigger chains, dig up more undead enemies, and find even more rewards. In general, Expedition logbooks can be much more difficult because you get a lot more remnants to interact with, stacking all of those really dangerous modifiers. Or maybe you plan carefully, and you pick a bunch of modifiers that make monsters immune to damage types you don't deal. No downside, all upside, free money. And if you're lucky, you might even dig up a boss, such as the fallen leader of the Knights of the Sun. He's had a lot of time to get very, very angry and very, very dangerous, but I bet he has some really cool stuff if you defeat him. Now, we don't actually know what sort of exclusive rewards are tied to Expedition yet. You will probably get a currency that you use to interact with the different Kalgurans, Gwenin lets you gamble on items, Tujin gives you currency stuff, and Rog is a unique form of crafting. But it could also be there's some sort of meta progression or power progression system tied to this as well. Maybe some sort of enchantment for your items, similar to what we saw in PoE 1's Settlers of Kalgur League. Then, last but not least, some of the areas on your atlas will be corrupted by the beast. If you slay enemies within these zones, demons will manifest into reality and attempt to attack you. In Path of Exile 1, this mechanic was originally called Scourge, and then it was reworked into Beyond. But let's be honest, most exiles just see it as, hey, there's more monsters, and that means more loot. Again, we don't really know too many of the rewards here for the beast's corruption, but I would guess it's some sort of currency item, maybe similar to the tainted currencies available in Path of Exile 1, which are the only things that allow you to modify corrupted items. And so that covers what we know so far about the Atlas of Worlds, the boss encounters, and the endgame activities tied to it. But as you explore the Atlas, and as you complete objectives, or as you defeat pinnacle encounters tied to the various endgame activities, you're going to get what are called Atlas passives. These are used on a special passive tree that you can think of as a meta progression system for your endgame. Breach, Ritual, Delirium, Expedition, Bossing, the General Atlas, and the Pinnacle Encounter all have their own Atlas passive trees. Because the points are unique to that tree, you don't need to respec every time you go to farm something different. So if you defeat Zesht, the Breach boss, you'll get 2 points to use in the Breach tree. Now, at some point, you may wish to respec to interact with Breach in a different way, but it's not like you'll ever think about, oh, I should really take those 2 points out of Breach and put them into Expedition. No, you can only use Breach points on the Breach tree, and you can only use Expedition points on the Expedition tree. There's also a bunch of generic nodes that appear in the center, which you can use for things like Precursor shrines, strongboxes, and essences. You could use to, say, make more rare monsters appear in your maps, or make the monsters that appear more rewarding, and probably a little bit more dangerous as well. In short, you can think of your Atlas passive tree not only as a progression system, but also as a currency farming system. Because if you specialize into something, it gives you unique rewards. And the more of those that you have, the more likely you are to have something that another player values because they're specializing into something different, or interacting with a mechanic in a different way. Just to pick a very simple example, maybe you focus on generating a lot of breach stones, but someone else focuses on generating a lot of breach rings. You might sell a unique item that you get from Zesht and use it to buy a really good breach ring that that other player picked up. But there are also some endgame activities which aren't directly tied to your Atlas. These are the endgame trials. So, for the early access, we will only have the Trial of the Sekimas and the Trial of Chaos. But there's going to be at least one more trial coming in PoE 2's future. In the Trial of the Sekimas, you're going to face even more floors, go through even more complex trap gauntlets, and after 4 total floors, face a powerful endgame boss. This boss does not appear in the campaign version of the trial. Now, we don't have confirmation of exactly which boss this is going to be, but I suspect it's Zarok the Eternal, as called out by the unique relic that they did tease as part of a reveal. Now, if you complete the endgame trial of the Sekimas, keep an eye out for some jewels. These are valuable equipment that you socket directly into your passive tree, and they give you some stats that would otherwise be very difficult to obtain, or your class might not have access to from other sources. There's also some really interesting jewels with a radius effect. These, instead of giving you stats directly, modify the passives within that radius, amplifying their bonuses or completely transforming them. Now, it looks like there's going to be some jewels that drop throughout the game anyway, but the most powerful unique ones are likely going to be tied exclusively to the Trial of the Sekimas. Since this is outside of the Atlas, it also doesn't have an Atlas passive tree. These are craftable items that function as your meta progression system. Magic items can be crafted, and they generally contain a lot of bonuses that are used to make your run easier. Unique relics have a chance to drop if you defeat the boss at the end, and these are single-use consumables that enter you into a challenge run. For example, are you good enough to do the entire thing without getting hit once? Because yes, there's a unique relic that has an exclusive unique item, but it sets your honor to 1, which means if you get hit once, your run is going to come to an end. On the other hand, if you want to do the endgame version of the Trial of Chaos, you're going to need to collect inscribed ultimatums. Now, one difference is that the endgame version does not end on room 4. It goes all the way up to 10 chambers and contains 3 bosses. My guess would be it's at rooms 4, 8, and 10. And number 2, the endgame version of the inscribed ultimatums may have an option to allow you to gamble currency. So instead of just giving up the ultimatum and entering the trial, you might give up the ultimatum and 13 exalted orbs. Then, if you fail, you lose those 13 exalt, but if you succeed, you will get double your investment, or 26 exalted orbs in addition to all your other rewards. Now, completing the endgame version of a Trial of Chaos still gets you Vol Orbs, and those can still be used to add sockets to your items, same as the campaign version, but you can also get Soul Cores, which are a more potent socketable item that offer huge bonuses. Things like plus 15 Spirit or Penetration that you wouldn't otherwise be able to obtain. We don't know too much about Soul Cores yet, but they look very strong and are probably going to have character building implications. And as for the Pinnacle encounter, well, GGG was being a little cagey, but it looks like it's going to be the Trial Master. Yup, that's right, the SAS Master's back, and you get to fight him and get some epic loot. So that's everything we know, at least for now, about endgame activities in Path of Exile 2. And I know, that was probably a lot. This video is going to be a little bit over 20 minutes long, and yes, it can feel very overwhelming. Just remember, the game is not going to dump all of these mechanics, all of these league mechanics, and all these pinnacle bosses on you at once. In fact, you're probably going to be mapping for dozens of hours before you see your first pinnacle boss. So, when you actually experience the content, you're going to have plenty of time to get comfortable with it as things are introduced slowly over time. It's very likely that the tier 1 watchstones you use will only have a few limited mechanics. Then, as you scale up and approach tier 16, things are going to get more and more complicated. But you'll have plenty of time to learn as you go, especially if you aren't just trying to rush to endgame as fast as possible. Also remember, when it comes to pinnacle encounters, there are different difficulty tiers. While the first ones won't be easy, they're certainly going to be achievable, whereas the later ones, such as a full max difficulty Zesht, could be a formidable challenge that many exiles won't succeed at. And hey, if you have more questions, don't worry. I'm going to make plenty more guides about Path of Exile 2. And hey, if you want to know more, I'm going to make plenty of guides about Path of Exile 2. So be sure to subscribe, ring that notification bell to see as soon as I upload anything. And hey, you made it to the end of the video, you probably enjoyed. Why not leave a like while you're down there? On the other hand, if you're looking for something else to check out right now, take a look at my classes and ascendancies in Path of Exile 2, where I take kind of the same approach and break down all the classes and ascendancies available, plus give a few of my thoughts. Or if you want to know more about endgame activities and pinnacle bosses, check out some of the guides over at MaxwellGG. GGG hid a lot of really cool things in the reveal, like hinting at but not confirming the boss for the Trial of the Sekimas through the unique item, which, if it works exactly like its Period 1 counterpart, does in fact name the boss. And in the near future, I'm going to make a video talking about some of those secrets, or at the very least, some of the ones that I've found that you may otherwise have missed. So you can look forward to that coming out soon. For now, thanks for watching to the end, I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.